Hey everyone, welcome to KSSP Podcast. I'm Spencer,
And I'm Katie.
and today we're going to be talking about farming. That's going to kind of be our theme of the day, if you will. And with that, we're going to be discussing agriculture, and then we'll go a little bit into hydroponic farming and a little bit into organic farming. So, first, we're going to start with agriculture. So, what is agriculture? Well, the word agriculture is a late Middle English adaptation of Latin agricultura from ager, field, and cultura, cultivation or growing. While agriculture usually refers to human activities, certain species of ant, termite, and beetle have been cultivating crops for up to 60 million years. Agriculture is the broad term for everything that goes into growing crops and raising animals to provide food and materials that people can use and enjoy. Farming, which involves cultivating the land and raising livestock, is one part of agriculture, which also includes plant science. The development of agriculture enabled the human population to grow many times larger than could be sustained by hunting and gathering. Farming is when people grow plants and take care of animals for food. And it was a big part of why people started to live in one place instead of moving around all the time. This allowed them to have more food than they needed, which helped cities form.
So, how long ago did we start farming? It's a great question. The history of agriculture began thousands of years ago. So, a really long time ago, about 105,000 years back, is when people started collecting wild plants for food. Then about 11,500 years ago, they started planting these plants. And animals like sheep, goats, pigs, and cows were made to live with people for food about 10,000 years ago. People in different parts of the world started growing their own plants at the same time. In recent times, big farming that only grows one kind of crop has become the main way people farm, but still around 2 billion people grow just enough food for themselves and their families. So farming started in different places all over the world, and different types of plants and animals were used for farming in at least 11 different areas. People have been eating wild grains for at least 105,000 years. A long time ago, about 23,000 years, people near the Sea of Galilee started growing crops like emmer, barley, and oats. In China, people started growing rice about 11,500 to about 6,200 years ago. And the oldest proof of rice farming was found from about 5,700 years ago. They also grew mung beans, soybeans, and azuki beans. So people in Mesopotamia started raising sheep about 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. They also started keeping cattle, which were wild animals, as pets about 10,500 years ago, in places like modern-day Turkey and Pakistan. Pigs were also raised for food in Eurasia, which includes Europe and parts of Asia, starting from when people first kept wild boars as pets about 10,500 years ago. The horse was domesticated in the Eurasian steppes around 3,500 BC. So people in South America started growing potatoes, beans, coca, and raising animals like llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs around 10,000 to 7,000 years ago in the Andes. So in New Guinea, sugarcane and some other types of root vegetables were grown for food around 9,000 years ago. And in Africa, people in the Sahel region started growing sorghum about 7,000 years ago. People in Peru started growing cotton about 5,600 years ago, and the same thing happened in Eurasia. In a place called Mesoamerica, people turned a wild plant called tezonite into maize, so corn, about 6,000 years ago. Experts have different ideas about how farming started. By studying how people went from hunting and gathering food to farming, They found that usually started with people staying in one place more and gathering more food. This happened in places like the Natufian culture near the Levant and the early Chinese Neolithic in China. Over time, people started planting the wild plants they used to gather, and those plants eventually became the crops we grow today. All right, and about 8,000 BC, people called Sumerians started living in villages and used the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, as well as a system of canals to water their crops. They grew things like wheat, barley, lentils, onions, and fruits like dates, grapes, and figs. They used plows to plant their crops, and the first picture of a plow is from about 3000 BC. So in Egypt, people started farming along the Nile River after 10,000 BC. They grew grains like wheat and barley, as well as things like flax and papyrus. In India, people started growing wheat, barley, and jujube around 9,000 BC, and soon added sheep and goats to their farm. By around 8,000 to 6,000 BC, they were also farming cattle, sheep, and goats. Cotton was being grown in India by 5,000 to 4,000 BC, and evidence shows that people were in the Indus Valley civilization used animal-drawn plows to farm as far back as 2,500 BC. So, a long time ago in China, people started using big stores to keep food safe and grew silk. They used water to power their mills and made farming easier by using irrigation. They also developed big plows with iron parts to make farming in the land easier. This idea spread to other parts of the world. People in China started growing rice about 8,200 to 13,500 years ago near the Pearl River using wild rice. In Greece and Rome, people grew wheat, barley, and emmer, and also grew vegetables like peas, beans, and olives. They kept sheep and goats mainly for their milk. In the Americas, people grew different types of crops like squash, beans, and coca. People in the Amazon started growing coca around 3,000 years ago. The Aztecs built systems to irrigate their crops, and the Mayans used canals and raised fields to farm in swamp areas. In the Andes, people grew crops like the peanut, tomato, tobacco, and pineapple, and kept animals like llamas and guinea pigs. Native people in the east of North America grew crops like sunflowers, tobacco, and squash, and gathered wild foods like wild rice and maple sugar. In the Southwest and Pacific Northwest, they practiced a type of farming that used fire to control growth of plants. The indigenous people of North America also developed a method of planting 3 crops together called the Three Sisters, which included winter squash, maize, and beans. So indigenous Australians were thought to just be wanderers who hunted for their food, but researchers have discovered they actually used fire to help grow food and make the environment better for gathering. In the forests of New Guinea, there aren't many food plants, so early humans may have used fire to help grow the karuka fruit trees, which they ate. This helped them live as hunter-gatherers. A long time ago, the Gunditjmara and other groups in Australia started to farm eels and trap fish. This started around 5,000 years ago. People in some parts of Australia started to grow yams, native millet, and bush onions, which might mean they lived in the same place for a long time. This happened in 2 different areas of the country, one on the central west coast and one in the eastern central area. During the Middle Ages, people in Western Europe changed the way they farmed. Instead of trading with others like they did in Roman times, they focused on being able to grow enough food for themselves. The farmers lived on big pieces of land called manors, which were ruled by a lord and had a church and a priest. During the Middle Ages, Europe learned new farming techniques and got new plants from the Al-Andalus area where the Arab agricultural revolution was taking place. This helped Europe change its farming, and they were introduced to sugar, rice, cotton, and fruit trees like oranges. In 1492, Columbus started a trade between the New World and the Old World. People in the New World started growing crops like corn, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and manioc. And people in the old world started growing crops like wheat, barley, rice, and turnips. They also started trading animals like horses, cows, sheep, and goats. And Christopher Columbus did a lot of other stuff, but we won't get into that right now. In the 1700s, people learned how to use irrigation, crop rotation, and fertilizers to grow more food. This helped a lot of people live better lives because they had enough to eat. In the 1900s, farms got really big and used machines to help grow crops. Farmers also used special chemicals to make their plants grow better and make their animals stronger. This made a lot of food for a lot of people. But using all these things can also be bad for the environment and can cause problems like water pollution, which we'll discuss in more detail shortly. Some people don't like this way of farming and want to grow food in a more natural way. In the 1930s, there was a really big dust storm in America that made life very hard for farmers. No, that was the Dust Bowl, I believe.
I think so, yeah. And we may now be wondering, what do farmers produce? And with that history, kind of mentioned just various different things that farmers produce. But there are four main things that are grown on farms, which is going to be food, materials for clothing, fuels, and materials for making other things. And some foods include things like grain, vegetables, fruit, oils for cooking, meat, milk, eggs, and mushrooms, just to name a few.
So how many people work in farming? Farming is a big job for a lot of people all over the world. More than 1/3 of all workers have jobs in farming, which is only second to jobs in the service industry. But in recent years, fewer people are working in farming, especially in countries that are still developing. This is because big companies are taking over small family farms and using machines to farm, which makes it possible to grow more crops with fewer workers. So in some countries like sub-Saharan Africa, almost half the people working on farms are women, and this number hasn't changed much in recent years. But in other countries like East and Southeast Asia, even more women are working on farms. The United Nations thinks that the way women work on farms might be changing, and they might start getting paid for their work instead of just growing food for their families. So in many rich countries, they can't find enough workers from their own country to work on farms. So they ask people from other countries to come help. In 2013, in countries like Spain, Italy, Greece, and Portugal, 1/3 of people working on farms were from other countries. So in the United States, more than half of the people working on farms in 2019 were from other countries. But lately, fewer people are coming from other countries to work on farms in the United States because wages are getting higher and it's becoming harder for farms to find workers. And a long time ago in Europe, most people worked on farms, but over time, fewer people started working on farms and more people started working in other jobs. Today, only about 10% of people in those countries work on farms. But in many poor countries, about 60% of workers are still working on farms, but this number is going down.
And we're just going to briefly go over a couple of advancements that have been made. So scientists and new technologies have helped farmers grow a lot more crops and raise more animals for meat, but there are concerns these methods also hurt the environment and can be harmful to animals. Using special seeds and new ways of taking care of animals has made it possible to get more food, but people are worried about the effect on animals and the environment. Some of those advancements include modern agronomy, plant breeding, agrochemicals such as pesticides and fertilizers, different technological developments, and selective breeding.
So, what are the environmental concerns? Farming has a big impact on the environment and can cause problems like making the planet warmer, using up underground water, cutting down too many trees, making bacteria resistant to medicine, and polluting the air and water. So the environment can also affect farming by causing problems like making plants grow less, turning land into a desert, and making soil bad for growing crops. All these things can make it harder to grow crops. And then there's also bad gases, so a little bit about those. Farming is the biggest source of harmful chemicals that go into the environment, like bug sprays, especially the kind used on cotton plants. A report from the United Nations in 2011 said that farming was responsible for making about 13% of the bad gases that cause the earth to get warmer. These gases come from using chemicals on crops, using energy from fossil fuels, and other farming practices. So a very important person at the UN, Henning Steinfeld, says that having a lot of animals for food is causing big problems for the environment. A lot of land is used just for raising these animals, and it takes up a lot of space, almost 30% of the whole world. This also leads to lots of bad gases going into the air, making the earth warmer. These bad gases come from the animals and their waste and are worse than the gases from cars. This is also making it so that there's less land for forests and other plants, which is making it harder for animals to live. The UN thinks that if we keep doing things the way we are, the bad gases from animals will go up by 60% by 2030. 60%. Wow. That's just, yeah. Farming and taking care of animals is a big reason for greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane in the air. It can also cause the land to be unhealthy and push wild animals away from their homes. So the farming and logging industries are responsible for about 20 to 25% of the gases that are causing climate change every year. There are ways to help stop this, like making new rules to reduce the harm farming is causing to the environment.
And then we'll discuss pesticides. So, as we've mentioned, agriculture can cause problems for the environment. This can happen when farmers use things like pesticides, which are chemicals to fertilize their crops, and too much water. These things can harm wildlife and their habitats. This can also lead to soil erosion and water pollution. A study in the UK found that in 1996, the cost of these problems was about €208 per hectare. In the US, the cost was around $30 to $96 per hectare for cropland and $714 million for livestock production. This means that farming could be expensive for society. The study suggested that more should be done to reduce these costs. Farms want to grow more crops and spend less money. They can do this by using things like fertilizer and getting rid of things that hurt the crops like bugs, weeds, and diseases. Making the farm fields bigger by taking away places for animals and plants to live can also help. But using things like pesticides, which kill insects and plants, can lead to a loss of nature and different kinds of plants and animals on the farm. This can also make it harder for the farm to grow as much as it wants to. People started using more pesticides since 1950 and now use 2.5 million tons of them each year around the world. But even with all these pesticides, the amount of crops lost to pests hasn't changed much. The World Health Organization found that every year there are 3 million cases of people getting sick from pesticides and 220,000 deaths. This happens because pests can get used to the pesticides, making them less effective, which means people have to keep finding new ones. This is called the pesticide treadmill. There are some people who believe that using pesticides and farming methods that produce a lot of crops in a small area is the best way to protect the environment and prevent hunger, but others disagree. They say that there are other ways to farm that are better for the environment and don't need to use as many pesticides. One of these ways is called push-pull farming, where different plants are grown together to help protect each other from pests. And then we'll talk about disease. Climate change is causing new problems for farmers. In 2021, a disease called stem rust was found on wheat plants in France, which is a place where it had never been seen before. This is happening because the winter is not as cold as it used to be, so insects that would normally die are now surviving and multiplying.
And then with the soil, humans are changing the Earth's ecosystem by using land to grow crops and raise animals. This is called land transformation, and it's causing a lot of harm to the environment. A lot of the Earth's land has been changed by humans, and some of it is not healthy anymore. This is called land degradation. About 24% of the land on Earth is degraded, and it's mostly farmland. People use this land to grow food, but it's not as good as it used to be. Land degradation happens because of bad land management, and it's a problem for 1.5 billion people. degradation can happen because of things like cutting down too many trees, making the land too salty, or making the soil too acidic.
And then for water, when there's too much fertilizer and waste from animals in the water, it can cause lots of problems. The water can turn green and smelly, and it can harm fish and other animals. This is called eutrophication. Farmers use a lot of water to grow crops, and sometimes this takes away water from places that need it. This can cause problems like wetlands disappearing, diseases spreading, and the land becoming too salty or flooded. It's important for farmers to use water wisely so that there is enough for everyone and the environment is protected.
So as far as energy goes, farms use energy in two main ways: by using it directly on the farm and by using it to make things they use on the farm. So direct use on the farm includes using fuel and oil to run farm vehicles and machines. Indirect use includes making things like fertilizer, pesticides, and farm machines. A big part of indirect use is making nitrogen fertilizer, which can use a lot of energy. In the U.S., the amount of energy used by farms for both direct and indirect use was the highest in 1979 and has gone down since then. The food system, which includes things like making, packaging, and delivering food, uses much more energy than just agriculture. Only about 1/5 of the energy used in the food system in the U.S. comes from agriculture.
And then plastic. So plastics are used a lot in farming, like to make crops grow better and to help use water and chemicals more efficiently. These plastics are called agriplastics and include things like covers for greenhouses and tunnels, mulch for the soil, cloth to block sun, containers for pesticides, trays for seedlings, mesh to protect plants, and tubes for watering. The most common types of plastics used are low-density polyethylene, or LPDE, linear low-density polyethylene, or LLDPE, polypropylene, or PP, and polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. It's hard to know exactly how much plastic is used in farming. One study says it was about 6.5 million tons a year, but another study estimated it was between 7.3 million and 9 million tons in 2015. A lot of farmers use plastic mulch to help their crops grow, but the plastic can break into smaller pieces and end up in the soil. In some areas where plastic mulch has been used for over 10 years, there has been up to 260 kilograms of plastic in just 1 hectare of topsoil. This shows that using plastic mulch can lead to a lot of plastic in the soil. Agricultural plastics, like plastic covers for greenhouses, are hard to recycle because they are often mixed with other things like dirt and chemicals. Because of this, people often just throw them away in fields or burn them. This can harm the soil and release tiny plastic particles into the environment. These tiny particles can also pick up harmful chemicals and spread them around. There's also a risk that using plastic in agriculture can hurt the soil and contribute to global warming.
So let's talk a little bit about the future here. New technology can help farmers make farming better for the environment. For example, conservation tillage is a way of farming that helps to stop soil from washing away, keeps water clean, and helps store carbon. There are other methods too, like conservation agriculture, growing trees and crops together, better ways to use land for animals, keeping grassland instead of changing it, and using a type of soil called biochar. But right now, most farming in the United States is just one crop at a time, and it's hard to use sustainable methods like rotating crops with grass or hay unless the government makes rules to help the environment more. So the International Food Policy Research Institute says that using different kinds of farming technology together can have a big impact on how much food is produced. They did a study to see how 11 different technologies could change farming by 2050. They found that if these technologies were used, the number of people who don't have enough food to eat could go down by 40%. Food prices could also be lower if we make changes to the way we farm and also change the way we think about being environmentally friendly. then we should be able to grow enough food for everyone on Earth, even with the Earth's growing population and changing climate. So since the 1940s, farming has gotten a lot better and produced a lot more food. And this is mainly because farmers started using big machines, fertilizers, and chemicals to protect their crops. Most of the energy used to make this happen comes from oil. In the 1960s to the 80s, a lot of changes happened in farming all over the world. This was called the Green Revolution. The amount of wheat and rice grown increased a lot, up to 390% for wheat and 150% for rice. But using so much oil has some problems too. People worry that if there is a shortage of oil, it will make farming more expensive and harder to do.
And then we'll just briefly go over a couple of different methods. So there is pastoralism. Pastoralism is when people take care of animals like cows, sheep, and goats. In nomadic pastoralism, people move the animals around to find food, water, and places to rest. This type of farming is done in dry areas like the Sahara Desert, some parts of Central Asia, and India. There's shifting cultivation. In shifting cultivation, farmers clear a small area of forest by cutting down trees and burning them. They use the land to grow crops for a few years until the soil becomes poor and can't grow crops anymore. Then they choose another piece of land and start again. This type of farming is mainly done in places with a lot of rain where the forest can grow back quickly. It's done in places like Northeast India, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon rainforest. There's subsistence farming. Subsistence farming is when people grow just enough food for their family or their village, but not enough to sell or trade. This type of farming is very common in Asia, and about 2.5 billion people did it in 2018. They farm about 60% of all the land that can be used for growing crops. There's intensive farming. Intensive farming is when farmers try to grow as much food as possible. They use a lot of things like water, fertilizer, pesticides, and machines to help, and this type of farming is mostly done in rich countries. And then there's also other methods, and some methods that we'll be going over in this series include hydroponic and organic. So we'll be going over those next. So what is hydroponic farming? Hydroponics is a way of growing plants without soil. Instead, the plants grow in water that has special nutrients in it. The plants grow with their roots in the nutrient solution or on a special surface like perlite or gravel. Sometimes the roots can change the balance of the nutrient solution and release substances that can affect the plants and the water. With hydroponics, scientists can also grow special plants that release medicines through their roots and into the water. Hydroponics growing uses different types of nutrients to help the plants grow. These nutrients can come from fish poop, duck manure, special chemicals you buy, or a special mix of nutrients made just for hydroponic growing. Some plants that are grown this way are tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, strawberries, lettuce, and even marijuana. These plants are usually grown in a special place like a greenhouse or a controlled environment, where everything can be kept just right for the plants. Scientists also use a special plant to research in plant science and genetics. Growing plants with hydroponics saves a lot of water. It takes 214 liters of water to grow 1 kilogram of tomatoes using normal farming methods, but using hydroponics, it only takes 70 liters of water. And with aeroponics, it only takes 20 liters of water. Growing plants using hydroponics often leads to higher plant growth and production of more food compared to growing them in soil or other materials. This happens even if the plants are grown in the same environment and given the same amount of nutrients. Growing plants using hydroponics takes less water and nutrients than other methods. This could be helpful in the future for people living in places with tough climates and not much access to water. They could grow their own food using hydroponics. And hydroponics is not only used on Earth, but has also proven itself in plant production experiments in space.
So now let's talk a little bit about the history of hydroponics. So the idea of growing plants without soil started a long time ago in the 1600s. A scientist named Francis Bacon wrote a book about it, and other scientists continued to study it. In the late 1800s, two scientists, Julius von Sachs and Wilhelm Knopp, did experiments and found out that plants can grow well without soil if they have the right nutrients and water. This idea became very popular in the 1900s and is still used by scientists today to study how plants grow. So in the early 1900s, scientists started looking into why some plants got sick in certain soil conditions. They did experiments using water instead of soil to grow plants and found that they could control the conditions better in the lab. This idea was popularized by a scientist named William Garrick from the University of California, who grew tomato plants very tall in a water-based solution instead of soil. So this type of growing plants in water instead of soil was called hydroponics. The word comes from two Greek words, hydro meaning water and ponos meaning work or labor, meaning working with water to grow plants. In the 1930s, scientists started to study how different soil conditions can affect plant health. They did experiments growing plants without soil in a controlled environment. William Garrick, who worked at the University of California, was a big supporter of this method and thought it could be used to grow crops. He even grew a tomato plant that was 25 feet tall in his backyard using this method and called it hydroponics. However, Garrick faced some challenges. He was not allowed to use the university's greenhouses for his experiments, and the university wanted him to share his research and findings. Garrick wanted to do more research and make sure everything was perfect before sharing it with others. Because of these disagreements, Garrick left his job at the university and continued his research on his own. In 1940, he published a book called Complete Guide to Soilless Gardening, where he shared his findings and the formula for growing plants using hydroponics. In 1938, two scientists named Dennis Hoagland and Daniel Arnon wrote a report about growing plants without soil, also known as hydroponics. They said that growing crops with the hydroponics was no better than growing crops in soil. However, 2 years later, William Garrick, who first came up with the idea of hydroponics, said that the report was not accurate. He said that the report only compared the growth of a few plants in hydroponics and soil, and that the growth of plants in hydroponics could be limited by things like light and air in the growing area, not just the nutrients. So over time, Garrick's ideas about hydroponic growing became important in commercial agriculture. Hoagland and his colleagues also made new formulas for nutrient solutions that are used in hydroponic growing. Hydroponics was used on Wake Island, a small island in the Pacific Ocean, in the 1930s. Wake Island was a stop for an airline company, and they needed to grow food for passengers. But the island had no soil, so they used hydroponics to grow vegetables. This was the first time hydroponics was successful, and it helped solve the problem of not having soil and not being able to afford to bring in fresh vegetables from far away. So during World War II, Daniel I. Arnon was a major in the army and used his knowledge of growing plants to help feed soldiers of Ponape Island. The island had no good land for farming, so Arnon grew crops in gravel and water with special nutrients to keep them healthy. This was an important way for the soldiers to get fresh food. And in the 1960s, a guy named Alan Cooper from England came up with a new way to grow plants using hydroponics called the nutrient film technique. In 1982, a big park called the Epcot Center opened at Walt Disney World and has a special place called the Land Pavilion that shows different ways to grow plants using hydroponics. And finally, recently, NASA has been doing a lot of research on hydroponics. They're using hydroponics to grow plants in a controlled environment like they would on Mars. They use special lights that give off different colors of light, and they don't make much heat. A plant expert at NASA thinks that hydroponics will help make space travel better in the future by growing plants that can provide food and clean air for astronauts.
And then we'll just briefly go over a couple of different techniques that you can use with hydroponics. So we'll talk about static solution culture. So as we mentioned, With hydroponic gardening, plants grow in containers filled with water and nutrients instead of soil. This type of growing is called static solution culture. People use containers like glass jars, pots, or tanks to grow their plants. The water in the container is kept aerated with air bubbles so the roots have access to oxygen. If the water isn't aerated, it is kept low enough so the roots are still above the water and can breathe. A single container can be used for one plant or for several plants. If the container is made of glass, it can be covered with materials like aluminum foil, butcher paper, or black plastic to keep light from getting in and affecting the plant's growth. The nutrient solution in the container is changed on a schedule, or when the concentration gets low and more water or new nutrients are added. In another type of hydroponic gardening called raft solution culture, the plants are put on a piece of plastic that floats on top of the water and nutrients. This way, the water level never goes below the roots.
There's also continuous flow solution culture. So in continuous flow solution culture, the water with nutrients that plants need to grow is always moving. This makes it easier to control the temperature, pH, and amount of nutrients in the water because they can be adjusted in a big tank that can take care of many plants at once. One way to do that is called the nutrient film technique, or NFT. In this method, a thin stream of water with all the nutrients the plants need is constantly moving past the roots. This way, the plants always have access to water, oxygen, and nutrients. The benefit of this is that it can lead to bigger and better crops over a long time. However, if there's a problem with the flow of water, like a power outage, the plants won't have what they need to grow. But overall, the nutrient film technique is a pretty effective way to grow plants using hydroponics. So the way that NFT hydroponic systems are built should follow certain guidelines. Usually they suggest having a slope of about 1 to 100, but it can be hard to make the surface level enough for the water to flow smoothly. So it's better to use a slope of 1 to 30 to 1 to 40. This helps even if the surface isn't completely flat. The slope can be made by the floor or by using racks or benches to hold the channels at the right angle. It depends on what is best for the plants being grown and the area they're being grown in. So when using the NFT system, the water flow should be around 1 liter per minute for each plant. When the plants are just starting to grow, the water flow can be lower, around half a liter per minute. But it shouldn't be more than 2 liters per minute because that could cause problems. If the channel is too long, like more than 12 meters, the plant might not grow so well. So it's best to keep the channel length at 10 to 15 meters or less. If the channel has to be longer, you can add another water source halfway to keep the plants healthy.
And then we'll go over aeroponics. So aeroponics is a way of growing plants where the roots are kept in an area filled with tiny droplets of a nutrient solution. This way of growing does not need any dirt or soil, and instead the plants are suspended in a chamber where their roots are regularly sprayed with a mist of nutrient solution. The big advantage of aeroponics is that the roots get a lot of fresh air. People have used aeroponics to grow different things like seeds, tomatoes, and small greens. With aeroponics, the growth environment can be more precisely controlled, and all parts of the plant receive a steady supply of oxygen and carbon dioxide, which helps plants grow faster and stronger. NASA has studied aeroponics and found that plants grown this way had an 80% increase in dry weight and used 65% less water compared to hydroponically grown plants. Aeroponics also reduces the risk of disease and pathogens and doesn't cause transplant shock when the plants are moved to soil. Aeroponics is also useful for research because the mist is easier to handle in a zero-gravity environment like in space.
There's also fogponics. So fogponics is a type of aeroponics that uses ultrasonic sound waves to turn the nutrient solution into tiny droplets. These droplets are much smaller than those created in regular aeroponics, making it easier for them to mix with air and reach the roots of the plants. This way the plants get both the nutrients and oxygen they need to grow.
And then there's passive sub-irrigation as a technique. So, passive sub-irrigation is a way of growing plants without having to water them all the time. The plants are grown in a special material that can hold water and nutrients. This material helps move water and food to the roots as needed, so the plants have a constant supply of water and food. This makes it easier for the grower and helps keep the roots healthy. Different materials can be used for passive sub-irrigation, such as expanded clay and coconut husk. These materials have more space for air, which is important for certain types of plants like orchids and bromeliads. Passive sub-irrigation also helps prevent root rot and adds extra moisture to the air. Growing plants in hydroculture can produce 10 times more crops per area compared to traditional farming. It also uses 13 times less water for one crop cycle, but it takes 100 times more energy in the form of kilojoules per kilogram.
And then there's ebb and flow. So there's a big tray and a big container below it with water and nutrients. So the tray is filled with something called growing medium, like clay, and the plants are either planted directly into or put in pots on top of it. The timer makes a pump come on at regular times to fill the tray with water and nutrients from the big container below. This keeps the plants well fed and with enough air. When the tray gets too full, the water starts to flow back into the big container until the timer turns the pump off. Rather than a continuous stream, plant roots are flooded with nutrient water mix. Water is continuously emptied back into reservoir to be reused.
There's run to waste. The run to waste system is a way of growing plants where they are given a mixture of water and nutrients regularly. This system was first thought of in Bengal in the year 1946, so sometimes people call it the Bengal system. This method of growing plants is done in different ways. One simple way is by hand. People add a mixture of water and nutrients to a container filled with materials for plants to grow in, like wok roll, perlite, vermiculite, cocoa fiber, or sand. Another way is with a machine that adds the mixture automatically. This machine has a pump, a timer, and tubes to bring the mixture to the plants. In big farms, computers control how often the mixture is added. Big plants like tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers are often grown using this method in big farms. To be good for the environment, the leftover mixture is collected and cleaned so it can be used again. This makes growing plants using this method very efficient.
And then there's deep water culture. So deep water culture is usually done using big containers like plastic buckets, and the plants are placed into a special pot that is suspended in the water. Because the roots get a lot of oxygen, the plants grow faster. The Kratky method is similar, but uses a still water reservoir instead of constantly circulating the water. So top-fed deep water culture. It's a way of growing plants where the roots are in a tank of water that has nutrients and oxygen in it. In this method, water is pumped from the tank and goes directly to the root of the plants. The water then flows back into the tank and the process repeats. A machine called an airstone helps add more oxygen to the water, and it runs all the time, 24 hours a day. The big advantage of top-fed deep water culture is that the plants start growing faster than with regular deep water culture. This is because the roots can access the water right away. But once the roots have reached the water in the tank, there's not much difference between top-fed deep water culture and regular deep water culture. However, because of the faster growth in the beginning, it can reduce the time it takes for the plants to grow.
And then there is rotary. A rotary hydroponic garden is a type of hydroponic growing system where plants are grown in a circular frame that keeps rotating. The plants are turned around 24 times each day so they get equal exposure to light and water. In the center of the circle, there is a light that mimics sunlight and helps the plants grow. The plants are also given a nutrient solution regularly to help them grow stronger. Plants grown in a rotary hydroponic garden mature faster than those grown in soil or other hydroponic systems because they are constantly moving. This system is also more space efficient than other hydroponic systems. However, rotary hydroponic gardens are not recommended for most people because they are still experimental and can be expensive to set up and maintain.
So next we're going to briefly go over some different substrates or underlying layers here. So first we'll go over rock wool. Rock wool, also known as mineral wool, is a type of material that is commonly used in hydroponic growing. It is made by melting rock, basalt, or slag and then spinning it into thin fibers, which are then bonded together to form a medium that can hold water and air, which helps plants to grow. So rock wool is often used in the early stages of plant growth, but it can be used throughout the plant's life. Rock wool has some benefits, like being efficient and effective for growing plants, but it can also be irritating to the skin if you handle it a lot. So to make rock wool work well for plants, it needs to have the right pH level, which is usually achieved by treating it before using it.
And then another option is expanded clay aggregate. So baked clay pellets are a type of material used in hydroponic growing systems. In hydroponics, the plants grow in water with nutrients instead of soil. Baked clay pellets are special because they are neutral, meaning they don't change the pH of the water and they don't have any nutrients in them. The clay is heated at very high temperatures to make the pellets. This makes the pellets light and airy so they won't get packed down over time. They come in different shapes and can be cleaned and used again. Some people think that washing them in certain solutions can help make them safe to use again, but others believe that the root growth from previous crops can get into the pellets and make them unsafe.
And then there's grow stones, which are made from recycled glass, and they're a great choice for hydroponic gardening. They have more room for air and water to help plants grow and can hold more water than other materials like perlite and peat. Each bag of grow stones contains a small amount of calcium carbonate, which is good for plants, and the rest is made of recycled glass.
There is coconut coir. Coconut coir is a material made from the fibers of coconut husks. The fibers are left over after making other things like floor mats and brushes. Coir needs to go through a process to get rid of salt, chemicals, and other things that might harm plants. This process can take up to 6 months and uses a lot of water. But even though it has some downsides, coconut coir is a good material for growing plants because it can hold a lot of water and helps keep plants healthy. When you add water to coconut coir, it gets bigger and soft. This makes it a good alternative to rock wool for growing plants and hydroponics.
There's also rice husks. These are parboiled rice husks, or PBH, are a waste product from growing rice. They can be used in hydroponics, but they break down over time and do not hold as much water as grow stones. A study showed that using rice husks as a growing medium didn't have any negative impact on plant growth.
And then there's perlite, and that is a type of rock that has been heated up until it becomes lightweight pieces of glass. It is often used in hydroponic systems or mixed in with soil to make it lighter. Although perlite is good for plants in some ways, it contains a lot of a substance called fluorine that can be harmful to certain plants. In comparison to another growing medium called vermiculite, perlite holds more air and less water and also floats.
And then there is vermiculite. Vermiculite is a mineral that has been heated up until it turns into light pebbles. It holds more water than perlite and can naturally bring water and nutrients to the plant in a hydroponic system. But if the plant's roots have too much water and not enough air, you can make the medium have less water by mixing it with more perlite.
There's pumice. Like perlite, pumice is a lightweight mined volcanic rock that finds application in hydroponics.
There's also sand. Sand may be a cheap option. It's also pH neutral, so it won't affect the pH of your hydroponic system. However, it is heavy, does not hold water very well, and must be sterilized between uses. Also, the ongoing surge in demand for sand has made it a scarce commodity. This natural resource is commonly used in computer microchips, construction, and is an active ingredient in cosmetics. But the current supply of this material has not been able to keep up with the speed of global urbanization.
There's gravel. The kind of gravel that is used for aquariums can also be used for hydroponics, but it is important to wash it first. Plants that are grown in a gravel bed with water being pumped by an electric pump are actually being grown using a type of hydroponics called nutriculture. Gravel is cheap, easy to clean, and does not get too much water. However, it is also heavy, and if the water does not keep flowing, the roots of the plant might dry out.
There's also wood fiber. It's made up from grinding up wood and can be used in hydroponics. It lasts a long time and has been used for a while in hydroponics research, but new studies show that it may not be good for plant growth.
There's sheep wool. Sheep wool can be used as a growing medium for plants in hydroponics. A study compared it to other materials like peat, coconut fibers, perlite, and wak wool. The results showed that sheep wool has a lot of air space and can hold a lot of water, which helps plants grow well. In the study, plants grown in sheep wool had the best results, and using a special mixture of humic acid, lactic acid, and Bacillus subtilis made all the materials even better for growing plants.
There's also brick shards. They have similar properties to gravel. They have added disadvantages of possibly altering the pH and requiring extra cleaning before reuse.
There is polystyrene packing peanuts. Polystyrene packing peanuts are cheap and easy to find, and they allow water to drain easily, but they are too light for some uses. They mostly get used in special tubes. You have to make sure to use the type of peanuts that don't break down, because the ones that do will turn into a messy substance. Also, plants may soak up styrene and give it to people who eat them, which could be dangerous for their health.
All right, so finally, we're going to just briefly discuss some solutions here. So, inorganic hydroponic solutions. Hydroponic solutions are a way to grow plants without soil using a special liquid that contains all the nutrients the plants need. The liquid is different from soil because it doesn't have clay particles or organic matter that can hold on to certain substances. This means the liquid can change quickly, which can affect the plant's growth. To make sure the plants get the right nutrients, the solution has to be adjusted and balanced often. There are standard recipes for these solutions, and it's important to get the right amount of nutrients for each type of plant. If the solution is too weak or strong, the plants may not grow well.
And there's also organic hydroponic solutions. So organic fertilizers can be used instead of regular chemical fertilizers in hydroponic growing, but using organic fertilizers can cause some problems. Those include the nutrition content of organic fertilizers can vary a lot, even if they look similar. Some organic fertilizers come from animal products, so there is a risk of spreading disease to plants that people or animals will eat. Organic fertilizers can be chunky and clog up the growing equipment. They need to be ground into a fine powder before being used. Organic fertilizers can take time to break down and release their nutrients to the plants. Some organic fertilizers, like manures, can stink up the growing area if they aren't breaking down properly. Some organic fertilizers need extra oxygen to break down, which can be a problem for the plant's roots. And some organic compounds are not essential for plant growth. So if precautions are taken, organic fertilizers can still be used in hydroponics successfully.
All right, and then let's talk about additives. So there are things you can add to hydroponic systems to help the plants grow better. These can be both organic and non-organic compounds. Some of these things are called chelating agents and humic acid, and they can help the plants get more nutrients from the soil. There are also bacteria that can help plants grow better. These bacteria are called plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, or PGPR. Some bacteria can even help the plant get more nitrogen, which is important for growth. Another type of bacteria called Rhodopseudomonas palustris can help make the plant use nitrogen better, which can lead to bigger yields and less nitrogen in the plant when it is harvested. Some types of bacteria can also help the plant get more phosphorus, which is another important nutrient. In some cases, adding certain types of bacteria, such as bacillus, can help the plants grow even in water that has high salt levels. This can be especially helpful in places where the water has a lot of salt. This can save money on special filtration systems and still lead to a good crop.
We'll just go over a couple of the different tools you may need if you're thinking of starting a hydroponic growing system. So managing nutrient concentrations, oxygen saturation, and pH values within acceptable ranges is essential. So some things you may need, it could be an electrical conductivity meter, and that is a tool that estimates the ppm of nutrients by measuring how well a solution transmits an electric current. You may need or want a pH meter, and that is a tool that uses an electric current again to determine the concentration of hydrogen ions in solution. You may need an oxygen electrode, which is an electrochemical sensor for determining the oxygen concentration in solution. Litmus paper, which is a disposable pH indicator strip that determines hydrogen ion concentrations by color changing chemical reaction. Graduated cylinders or measuring spoons may also be needed to measure out pre-mixed commercial hydroponic solutions. And you may also need tools that will be used to perform accurate chemical analysis of nutrient solutions. So those could be balances to accurately measure materials, laboratory glassware such as burettes and pipettes for performing titrations, colorimeters for solution tests, which apply the Beer-Lambert law, spectrophotometer to measure the concentrations of the key parameter nitrate and other nutrients such as phosphate, sulfate, or iron. Using these tools can be beneficial to growers of any background because nutrient solutions are often reusable. Because nutrient solutions are virtually never completely depleted, refortification of old solutions with new nutrients can save growers money and can control point source pollution, which is a common source for the eutrophication of nearby lakes and streams. There are also some software programs out there that could help as well. If you want to grow plants using hydroponics, you don't need to necessarily know a lot about chemistry. There are tools that can help you make your own nutrient solution. HydroBuddy and HydroCal are two programs that can help you do this. HydroBuddy works on Windows, Mac, and Linux, or Linux? Linux. Okay. While HydroCal works through a website. These programs make it easy to mix your own nutrient solution, even if you don't have a lot of knowledge about chemistry. HydroBuddy even lets you save your own special mix of nutrients and predict how much electrical conductivity it will have.
So last here, we'll just go over what people consider benefits and what some people consider to be disadvantages. So first, we'll talk about the benefits. Hydroponics has many benefits, like giving the plant roots constant access to oxygen and allowing the plant to get as much or as little water as nutrients as it needs. This helps prevent over and underwatering, which is a common problem in soil growing. In hydroponics, water can be drained away if the plant doesn't need it, which helps keep the roots from getting too much water and drowning. In soil growing, a grower needs to know exactly how much water to give the plant or it could have problems. There's more plant density, so plants can be easily moved as they grow, decreased area required, so more plants can grow in the same amount of space, and you're able to grow plants vertically, again, giving more space. Also, higher crop yields. It's been reported that hydroponic greenhouses have higher crop yields and better quality produce. Oh, my light died. So it's been reported that hydroponic greenhouses have higher crop yields and better quality produce compared to traditional. And there's also a help of AI for monitoring. And then finally, there's less water waste. So there's less water evaporation. The disadvantages. So there's a larger initial investment. With hydroponics come the added cost of a building, pumps, tanks, controls, and a supplemental lighting system. And there's also higher energy costs. Most of the technology involved needs electricity, whereas with traditional farming, the sun provides a lot of the energy for your plants, leading to less electricity costs comparatively. And more technical skills required, so at least some understanding of chemistry, monitoring and growing systems, and basic plant production knowledge is needed.
Now that we have gone over hydroponic farming, next we'll be discussing organic farming. So we're going to start with organic. What is organic farming? Organic farming is a way of growing crops and raising animals that can be good for the environment. Instead of using harmful chemicals, farmers use things like compost, animal manure, and bone meal to help their plants grow. They also use methods like rotating crops and planting different crops together to keep the soil healthy. Organic farming started because people didn't like how farming was changing and wanted to do it in a better way. Rules for organic farming say that farmers can only use natural things and can't use synthetic chemicals that are bad for the environment.
So how long has organic farming been around? Organic farming has been happening in the U.S. since the 1940s. It started with small gardens, but now there are big organic farms with extra food that they sell with a special label. So companies now make organic food and many stores only sell organic products. Because there are so many organic products, people wanted to make sure they are really organic, so a system was made to check and make sure.
And how is organic farming done? Well, organic farming uses special methods to grow crops and raise animals. Methods include crop rotation, using compost and green plants to help the soil, and using bugs to control other bugs. Farmers also use natural materials to control disease and weeds. They do not use genetically modified plants or animals. By using these methods, organic farmers help the environment and make their crops and animals healthy. Organic farmers use different things to help their plants grow. They use animal poop, special types of fertilizer made from seeds or minerals, and things like rock phosphate or green sand, which are natural forms of important plant nutrients. Sometimes the soil's acidity levels need to be adjusted to help plants grow better. This can be done using things like lime or sulfur. In some countries, farmers can use other safe and natural compounds like iron or aluminum to adjust the soil's acidity.
So, let's talk about crop rotation. Plants need different nutrients to grow well. One of the biggest challenges for organic farmers is making sure plants get enough nitrogen at the right time. This can be done by using methods like crop rotation and planting special cover crops like legumes, which can pull nitrogen from the air and turn it into a form that plants can use.
We'll go over intercropping. So intercropping is a way farmers can use different plants to control pests and diseases, and it can also add nutrients to the soil. But it can be difficult because the plants might compete for space and nutrients. To help with this, farmers might space the plants further apart. Another way to add nutrients to the soil is to turn leftover plant parts back into the soil. Different plants leave behind different amounts of nitrogen, which can help plants get the right amount of nutrients at the right time.
There's also polyculture. So organic farming grows different kinds of crops together. This is called polyculture, and it helps the environment. Growing many different crops helps good bugs and tiny organisms that live in the soil. This makes the whole farm healthier and helps keep plants from disappearing forever.
There's composting and green plants. Organic farming, again, uses natural ways to make the soil fertile again. This is done by using things like compost and green plants. Tiny organisms like mushrooms and worms help break down the plants and release food for other plants. Farmers use different methods to make the soil better, like rotating crops, planting cover crops, and using compost. This helps keep the soil healthy and stops it from washing away. It also helps stop climate change by holding on to carbon.
And then there's pesticides. While conventional agriculture uses synthetic pesticides and water-soluble synthetically purified fertilizers, organic farmers are restricted by regulations to using natural pesticides and fertilizers. For instance, naturally occurring pesticides such as pyrethrin are permitted, while synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are generally prohibited. Synthetic substances that are allowed include, for example, copper sulfate, elemental sulfur, and ivermectin. Genetically modified organisms, nanomaterials, human sewage sludge, plant growth regulators, hormones, and antibiotic use in livestock husbandry are prohibited.
And we may be wondering, is organic farming regulated? And it is. They are so organic agricultural methods are internationally regulated and legally enforced by many nations, based in large part on the standards set by the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, IFOAM, an international umbrella organization for organic farming organizations established in 1972.
So now we'll look into what people are saying for and against the organic farming method. So we'll go over some pros and cons here. So the pros include, So organic farming is basically when farmers take care of the earth and all the creatures that live on it. They don't use harmful chemicals and instead make homes for animals. This way of farming can be easier, save money, and make the soil, water, and air cleaner. Plus it helps with flowers being pollinated. People who like organic farming believe it's good for the earth, helps farmers be in charge of their own farms, and makes the food we eat healthier and safer. There's a lot of organic farming all around the world, especially in Australia. People are still trying to make it even better. People who support organic farming think it's good for the earth because it keeps the soil healthy and uses less energy. They also think it helps stop climate change by keeping carbon in the soil. But they also know that it takes up more land to grow the same amount of food as regular farming. If too many people in rich countries use organic farming, it can mean cutting down more forests, which could be bad for the earth. A research group called the Hudson Institute found out that it takes 3 times more land to make organic beef than regular beef, but there are ways that organic farming can help fix land that was once a desert or not good for farming. This can be done by growing food for both animals and people on the same land, which saves space. People who like organic farming say that the soil is better quality and can hold more water, which makes it easier for crops to grow in dry times. A study showed that over time, organic farming makes the soil even better, but another study found that regular farming is better for growing crops on soil that doesn't have enough good stuff in it, especially in cold places. This is because organic farming often needs things from outside the farm, which is not good for the long term.
Then we'll just go over a couple of cons. So organic farming can help the animals and nature around the farm, but since it doesn't make as much food as regular farming, more land, as we mentioned, has to be used for farming somewhere else. This means that natural places like forests have to be turned into farmland. This can cause harm to animals and nature and make the climate worse, even though it helps the environment close to the farm. A study in the UK found it's difficult to say which type of farming is best for the environment. The study showed that organic farming can sometimes cause problems like making the air and water dirty, even though it uses less energy. But the study also found that some types of farming cause fewer problems, like using less chemicals. The study also found that organic farming needs more land to grow the same amount of food. This was especially true for foods like wheat and potatoes, which need even more land when grown without chemicals. Farms that use organic methods usually make less food than farms that use regular methods. The difference can be up to 85% less food. Organic food also costs more, about 2.5 times more than regular food. This is good for the farmers because they earn more money, but it means that people who buy the food have to pay more too. Scientists at Oxford University studied 71 reports about organic farming. They found that some organic food can actually harm the environment more than regular food. For example, they found that organic milk, cereal, and pork made more pollution. But they also found that organic beef and olives made less pollution in most cases. Organic farming needed more land, but used less energy. It also caused problems like making the air and water dirty, damaging the soil, and hurting the water. The scientists think we should talk about the best ways to farm instead of just arguing about organic versus regular farming. They want to find the best solutions for different situations. And then a study from 2012 found that organic farming can sometimes hurt the environment. This is because organic farming often makes more pollution in the air and water, which can harm plants and animals living there. Organic farming also needs more land to produce the same amount of food as regular farming, which can lead to even more pollution. This extra pollution can cause problems like too much algae growing in lakes and rivers and too much nitrogen in the water, which can harm the plants and animals that live there.
So you might be asking yourself, is organic food better for me? It can be hard to compare organic and non-organic food because there can be differences in how it's grown and handled. There is not enough proof to say that organic food is safer or healthier than non-organic food, and there's no evidence to show that organic food tastes better. Organic foods are grown without using synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, hormones, or antibiotics. But a study found that they are not healthier than regular foods. They have the same amount of vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates, so you won't get more nutrition by eating organic foods. According to information from the USDA, food grown organically has fewer chemicals called pesticides than food grown in a regular way. But even the regular food still has a safe amount of pesticides. We are not sure yet if the pesticides used on organic foods are safer than the ones used on regular food. And this is because there are many things in the environment that can affect our health, and it's hard to know for sure if the pesticides are the main cause of health problems. So scientists don't have enough information to say if organic animal products like meat and dairy are better for you because they don't have hormones and antibiotics. More research needs to be done to know for sure.
And then we'll kind of go over a little bit about GMOs. So what about GMOs, or genetically modified organisms? So we'll kind of go over what they are. A GMO is a plant, animal, or microorganism that has had its genes changed using special techniques. This means that new genes can be added or existing genes can be changed, removed, or improved. GMOs can be made by transferring genes from one species to another, even from different groups of plants or animals. The first type of genetically modified crops were made to be eaten by people or animals and to be safe from bugs and diseases. The second type was made to have better vitamins and minerals. The third type could be used for things like making medicine, fuel, or cleaning up pollution. Farmers are always trying to find ways to grow more food, make working on the farm easier, and help the environment. Using genetically modified crops is one way to do this. Genetically modified crops can help by fighting pests and diseases, growing better in different weather conditions, and being healthier for people and animals to eat. Right now, most genetically modified crops are things like soybeans, cotton, corn, and canola. These crops are mainly grown in countries like the United States, Brazil, and India, but not all countries grow genetically modified crops, and some farmers in Europe and Africa have not started using them yet. Studies have shown that genetically modified crops can be helpful for farmers. They can increase the amount of food grown and reduce the need for harmful pesticides. This can lead to more money for the farmers and better food for everyone. Most genetically modified crops are made to be resistant to certain weed-killing chemicals. These genetically modified crops are more common than crops that are grown in a traditional way and can resist weed killers. For example, in the United States, 93% of soybeans and most of the genetically modified corn are resistant to a weed killer called glyphosate. Most genetically modified crops are also made to protect against insects. This is done by adding genes from a type of bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. Only a small number of genetically modified crops have other traits, such as being resistant to viruses or changing the way the plant grows and matures. Golden rice is a type of genetically modified crop that has been made to help improve the nutrients in rice. Scientists added special genes to make the rice produce beta-carotene, which is a part of the vitamin A. This is important because there are some places where people don't get enough vitamin A, which can lead to blindness and even death, especially in children. The first version of golden rice didn't have a lot of beta-carotene, but later versions were improved and had 23 times more. In 2018, golden rice was approved for people to eat. Scientists have also found a way to use plants and plant cells to make medicines. They do this by changing the plant's genes to produce certain medicines inside the plant. Some of the plants they use are duckweed, algae, and moss. The medicines can be used to treat different health problems like Gaucher's disease and can be found in the plant seeds. Scientists like using plants because they can make more complex medicines and there is less risk of contamination compared to using bacteria. Some plants used include transgenic carrots and tobacco cells. Vaccines are important to keep us healthy, but they can be expensive to make and store. Some scientists are working on a way to make vaccines using plants, which would make them easier to get to people who live in poor or developing countries. These vaccines can be stored in the plant, so they don't need to be kept in a special place or expensive fridge. They also last a long time and protect us when we eat them. The only problem is that making vaccines using plants is very expensive. So, for now, most plant vaccines are being used for animals instead of people. And genetically modified crops can help reduce the amount of CO2 released by farming. This is because they can make farming more efficient, leading to higher crop yields, less use of harmful chemicals, less need for tractors, and less soil disturbance. A study from 2021 found that if farmers in the European Union started using genetically modified crops more, it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 33 million tons of CO2. That's 7.5% of all the CO2 released from farming.
So are GMOs regulated? Short answer is yes, they are. So the government controls and makes rules about genetically modified organisms, GMOs, like crops and food. This started in 1975 at a meeting in California. They made suggestions on how to use GMOs safely. There's also a treaty called the Cartagena Protocol that helps govern and control the use of GMOs between countries. 157 countries follow this treaty and use it as a guide to make their own rules. Universities and research places have a group of people who make sure any experiments with genetically modified organisms are safe and approved. The people doing the experiment need to be trained, and the place they are doing the experiment needs to be approved by a government agency. There are rules and guidelines in place to make sure working with GMOs is safe for people and the community. These rules are based on how dangerous the GMOs are and how easily they can make people sick. There are different levels of safety, from level 1 where there is no risk of getting sick to level 4 where the GMOs can be very dangerous. Different countries might have different rules and names for these levels. So different countries have different rules about genetically modified organisms. Some countries allow GMOs and have rules about how they can be used, while others do not allow them at all. In some countries, the rules are different depending on what GMO will be used for, such as food or something else. There are 38 countries that do not allow the growing of GMOs, but they do allow research using them. However, sometimes people break the rules and grow GMOs illegally. In Europe, the rules for using genetically modified organisms are different from the United States. In Europe, there are separate rules for growing GMOs and using them in food. Only a few GMOs are allowed to be grown in Europe, but many can be used in food. People in Europe have different opinions on GMOs, and the rules can change depending on the country. In the United States, the rules focus more on the science behind the GMOs and don't see them as a big problem. They also don't regulate things made using gene editing in the same way they do GMOs. But in Europe, anything made using gene editing is considered a GMO. So the question of whether foods made from genetically modified plants should be labeled is a big one for regulators. Some people believe that it's important for people to know if their food was made from genetically modified plants, so they can make informed decisions about what they eat. This is why 64 countries require labeling of these foods. In Europe, all food or feed that has more than 0.9% of genetically modified ingredients must be labeled. In the United States and Canada, labeling is optional. There are some who say that labeling is not necessary because there is no evidence that the foods are harmful. The American Medical Association and the American Association for the Advancement of Science believes that labeling is not necessary and may even be misleading. Despite this, there has been a 30% increase in sales of products labeled as not containing genetically modified ingredients, reaching $1.1 billion in 2014.
And then we'll just kind of go over what are kind of the different stances, I guess, that people have on GMOs. So obviously people have different opinions about GMOs, especially about using them outside of the lab. This has caused debates between different groups like customers, companies, governments, and scientists. Some people are worried about the safety of food made from GMOs and what it could do to the environment. This has caused fights and laws that limit the use of GMOs in some countries. People are mainly worried about how GMOs could affect their health and the environment. They're afraid that GMOs might cause allergic reactions or that harmful genes could mix into the food we eat. There is a general agreement among scientists that food made from genetically modified crops is safe to eat and no different from normal food. But some people, including the public, might not think that genetically modified food is safe. Different countries have different rules about genetically modified food, with some countries not allowing it and others allowing it, but with different levels of rules and regulations. People used to think that genetically modified plants wouldn't mix with wild plants and that it wouldn't cause any harm. But now we know that sometimes this can happen and it can make weeds harder to kill. In some places, people found that genes from genetically modified crops got into other crops. Scientists are now making GMOs that won't spread so easily. For example, they make genetically modified salmon that can't have babies and genetically modified bacteria that can only live in certain conditions. They are also trying to make genetically modified plants that won't be able to have babies. People are worried about how GMOs might affect the environment and farming. They are concerned that they could reduce the number of different species, cause new problems with pests, and make pests become resistant to the treatments used against them. Studies in China and the United States have shown that when people use GMOs correctly, it actually increases the number of insects and doesn't cause new pest problems. And when people follow the right steps, pests don't become resistant to treatments. There was a concern that GMOs might harm monarch butterflies, but more research has shown that the levels found in the environment aren't high enough to cause harm. And there are some people who believe that using technology to change genes is like playing God. They have moral and ethical concerns about this technology, especially now that it's possible to change human genes. People are worried about what limits there should be on this technology and if it is right to use it at all. Some people also have concerns about how far this technology can go, especially in terms of making changes that can be passed down from one generation to another. There are also worries about things like making sure food that is not genetically modified is not contaminated and making sure companies that make and sell GMOs are not too powerful. Some people are also worried about the patents on life and use of property rights. People have different opinions, as we've discussed, about GMOs. Some people in Europe don't like them, but people in North America are more okay with them. This might be because there have been problems with food safety in Europe in the past, so people don't trust the food as much. Some groups, like the Organic Consumers Association and Greenpeace, think that GMOs might not be safe and want to label them or stop using them until we know more.
Yeah, I think the whole freaking out about GMO things personally is just, and this is just my opinion, but I get also based on what the scientists say, but I just think it's kind of ridiculous and blown out of proportion. Like, it can, like, there are circumstances where it can be dangerous, but like, as long as it's regulated properly, like, I mean, like, GMO shouldn't be outright banned. Like, no. I mean, the insulin I take is a GMO, and like, if you look at how bananas used to look like 100, 200 years ago, and compare them now, like after they've been genetically modified, like it's completely different. Like there's all kinds of fruits you can look into, like how they've been genetically modified over the centuries and what they used to be like and what they're like now. Like it's not a dangerous thing. We've already been consuming GMOs just from like crossbreeding and things like that, even before we had all this technology. And I think the human gene editing is a different topic. I think that's different.
Yeah.
But, and I think we did talk about that before, but in another episode. But yeah, that's just my piece on the GMO thing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with that. I don't think GMOs are a bad thing at all. With food, especially, because if it helps us get more food for people and uses less space, which I think that was the biggest thing that I think that was the biggest thing with, I guess the main negative to organic farming was just how much space it uses and how much land you need when we can grow these crops with GMOs with less land.
Yeah.
Now, and especially since organic hasn't been shown to be better nutritionally for you or even taste, like there's no nutritional benefits for organic food. it's really just a label that people use as like a scare tactic almost
Yeah,
to
to make
convince
you
them
feel
to buy
better.
higher priced food. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like a scam in my opinion. Even like after we've gone over all of like organic farming and GMOs. Like I understand that there can be concerns with GMOs and we can address those concerns, and like again, as long as it's regulated, and like I mentioned, I think somewhere it was, as long as people are following the steps properly, not
Hmm.
taking shortcuts, then then it's been shown to be fine, safe, and effective. So then that comes down to human use. So we shouldn't be mad at the GMOs. We should be concerned with the people using them and make sure that they're using them correctly and safely. So it's
Yeah.
not really even the GMOs, it's, I guess, us as humans that we need to make sure we're doing it right and not doing unethical things, I guess, with any of this. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's still like interesting, obviously, to talk about. But
Yeah.
I I do think organic farming can be a little bit of a scam.
I agree with that too, 100%.
But I mean, hey, those farmers who are organic farming, I mean, and some of them might believe it, so I'm not trying to like discredit them, but hey, they found a way to make more money by selling
Yeah.
these organic crops to people, and people are buying it. So hey, more power to them, I guess. If you can convince people that organic food is better, even though there's not much data behind it, and charge them more for that food so that you get more money, I don't know. That's just
Yeah. Yeah.
kudos, I guess, to you
A
for
nice
doing that.
little gift they got going there.
Yeah. But I mean, people are still gonna fall for it. People still fall for it, and
Yeah, because organic just sounds so much better. Like the word just sounds
I mean,
healthier to people
yeah,
for some reason.
it does. And I'm not gonna say it doesn't either. Like
Yeah.
organic sounds like better, but when you look into it,
Hmm.
it isn't any better for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if it had, and especially since, like, I don't know, I feel like some people think it's more nutritious, but we actually used GMOs, as we discussed, to increase the amount of vitamin A in some foods and the amount of
Mhm.
nutrients and vitamins in foods so that
Yeah.
we wouldn't have those deficiencies. And now people are wanting to go back to organic food, which may have less vitamins and minerals comparatively, leading to more nutrient deficiencies just in general, which are not good, obviously. It's just interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
GMOs and organic, that debate, or whatever you want to call it, is an interesting
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah. So once again, we just want to thank everyone who's been watching, liking, and sharing. We just want you to know that we really appreciate you guys.
And we are excited to have you guys along on this journey with us as we see where KSSP podcast goes. And as always, you can leave a comment below if you have any topic ideas that you want to hear us talk about in future episodes.
You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and we do occasionally live stream on Twitch, so you can follow us there to see when we do.
And don't forget to give this video a like, as well as follow or subscribe to our other social media accounts and turn on notifications so that you get notified when our new content comes out. Otherwise, we will see you all in the next video.